right,
Okay.
thanks.
Well, it's not all, there it is, okay. Good.
All right, it's good to be back.
Yeah, that's right.
Good to be back. How many of you, did y'all see what I put up, for chapters 4 and 5?
I looked at it Monday.
Okay.
I shall not tell a lie.
Was this something more than, other than what you had done for 4 and 5 a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, that's what I meant, yeah, but,
It was January the 9th, wasn't it?
February.
yeah,
February.
yeah, it's like 2 weeks ago.
Uh-huh.
I put it up there on YouTube and sent the link out.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I got that too, yeah.
Okay, good. So that
Just
means we're
don't
all.
quiz us.
No. So we're all on the same page then.
6 and 7, right?
Yep.
What am I doing? But I turned back and see.
You did good. There's this over here with all these churches on. What's the name of this area? Turkey, I think. Turkey. Okay, that's what I wanted.
Okay, so today we start getting into some stranger stuff tonight. This is chapter 6 and 7, which it's the beginning, the opening of the 7 seals. So tonight we see the first 6 seals being opened, and get to the 7th seal next week. Hi, there's somebody else coming in.
Come see me.
Hey, come on in.
And Hobby.
She brought Hobby with her.
Yeah.
How's that little wandering around the parking lot?
And we hadn't even gotten started good yet. So, like I was mentioning, we get to chapter 6 and 7 tonight, which is the opening of the first 6 of the seals. You remember from the video that I put up on YouTube a couple of weeks ago, chapter 5 sets all this in motion. John sees in the hand of the one on the throne a scroll sealed with 7 seals, and if you remember, he weeps because no one's worthy to open the scroll or break its seals, and then the angel tells him the Lion of the tribe of Judah is conquered. Then John turns and he sees a lamb standing as though slain, and that sets forth heavenly worship, sort of in 3 phases. First, it's the cherubim and the elders right around the throne, and then it's the whole country of heaven, and then it's every living creature. And so tonight we get to what happens when these seals are opened. This is, I've mentioned it before, but it bears repeating that we've got several series of 7s. There are 7 seals. And next week when we open the 7th seal, we see that 7th seal is in reality just another series of 7s. 7 trumpets. And then the 7th trumpet, when we get to that, is actually just another series of 7s. 7 vials or bowls, depending upon how your translation puts it. So, I'm going to read the first few verses of chapter 6. I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider is permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. When you opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, Come. And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures say, A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, Come. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. Okay, so this is what we've all heard of, I guess, is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And there has been no shortage of ink spilled, the pages of history about these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. A lot of famous artwork done depicting what they look like. I think that in looking at these, several things to mention. One is that we probably shouldn't pour too much into this because the descriptions are so short. It's not like John has given us a whole lot of information about each one. These descriptions are all really short. And to my mind, if the description of something is really short, then that's probably an indication that it's maybe not something worthy of 1,000 pages being spilled on it. These are all very short descriptions. And also, how are each one of these riders ushered in? Who ushers them in?
One of the 4 living creatures?
Yes, exactly. So these are, we have these 4 horsemen, these riders that are bringing all sorts of dire cataclysmic stuff. And who allows that? Ultimately, it's allowed by God. That means Satan himself is limited. That the destruction that can happen, that be it satanic or otherwise, is always limited by the power of God. Satan has no power independently. Don't ever, ever, ever think for a second that you have Satan and God as 2 equal opposites. They're not. Satan is a created being. The devil is a created being and is not an equal to Jesus. Satan is not an equal to God. There's only one Almighty, and that's God. Satan's not even an equal to Jesus. Don't even think that for a second. When we get later on in the book, we see that Satan is actually defeated by an archangel, or the archangel Michael. So all of this destruction that we see being ushered in chapter 6, it's allowed by God in one way or another, and it's limited by God. It's not that Satan just of his own says, I'm going to assert this authority and do it. Okay. So we have these these 4 riders, and pardon me. The first rider coming on a white horse. When you see a rider on a white horse, we might be tempted to think that that rider is whom?
Christ.
Christ. And there are some scholars who say that. That's a minority viewpoint. That, to me, that's too easy. So if it's not Christ, then who is this rider on the white horse? We're told that the rider comes to conquer.
It could be a false Messiah or an antichrist.
Yes.
Because there's deception within the scripture here.
Yeah. That's a great point. That's one of the ways of looking at this first rider, and implied in this first rider is deception. Some might have this out to deceive the faithful. So that is definitely one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is this: if you think historically, in 62 A.D., Rome had to fight off an invasion by the Parthians, and they were really feared riders, really feared horsemen and archers. And so when John writes this, it'd be within the memory of this invasion by these really feared horsemen and archers would be within their memory, would be within their lifetime. And that's going to be the image that comes to mind. So I think in this first horseman, we could think of it in terms of deception, or we could also think of it in terms of warfare, of invasion.
Did you say the Parthians invaded Rome?
Yeah, invaded Rome. And and that would have been, a rider with a bow would. That's going to be for John's readers. That's what's going to come to mind. Yeah.
But this rider on the white horse is not going to be victorious.
No.
Because he's not completely armed. He has a bow but no arrow.
Ah.
And he has a crown. But he lacks what he needs to conquer.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that. So the first rider possibly is implied deception, like false prophet kind of thing. The other possibility, and I think and I tend to hedge this way, but really it could be both, is that what's in view is invasion, warfare. So that is the rider on the white horse. Then we have a second horse. When you open the second seal, I heard a second living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. Okay, a red horse that's coming to take peace from the earth. And think of the Greco-Roman pantheon. Who is the god of war? Mars. And of course Mars is the red planet, so that's that's an easy one. That's an easy one. And I think that if the first one is bringing invasion, and possibly deception as well, the second one is bringing. If the first is invasion from without, and the second one could be more internal civil war. And again, that's something else that that John's readers would have known of in in AD 69, there was 1 year in which there were 4 different emperors.
What year was that?
AD 69,
80,
AD,
AD,
yeah,
69.
69 AD.
69, 80.
Yeah. So you had like the Emperor Nero died in the middle of 68. Let me make sure I'm trying to give you these names right. He died in the halfway through 68 AD, and he was succeeded by a guy named Galba, who reigned into the very first few weeks of 69, and then he was killed and succeeded by someone named Otho, who reigned for just a few months, who was killed by someone named Vitellius, who reigned for a few more months until he was ousted by someone named Vespasian at the end of 69. So within that one calendar year, there were 4 different emperors, and each one of them died by assassination, by murder. So there's continual civil war in Rome for a year. Like one claimant of the throne after another, and Roman armies fighting Roman armies. So if you go back to what John's readers are going to think, that's probably what's coming to mind. And then there is a third rider. You open the third seal. I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine." So this would seem to be, this is bringing famine. It's a black horse that is bringing famine. And the prices given, like vastly exaggerated prices for ordinary commodities of life. As yeah, Elizabeth told me the price of gas went up 10 cents just today.
Today?
Yeah.
Oh,
So this is famine, and with famine comes just hyperinflated prices for just any of the ordinary necessities of life. When you think about, if you think about what happens in conflict, invasion, threats from abroad can lead to internal strife, and anytime you have internal strife, civil war, and that always brings famine. It always brings famine. There was famine in the South during the Civil War because all the guys were in the army. There just weren't available bodies to plant crops and harvest them. So one thing leads to another, And they have this curious phrase, "Don't harm the oil and wine."
yes.
What would that symbolize, do you think? There's
Destroy it,
what?
not to destroy it.
Yeah.
At least they'd have something to do.
That wouldn't die of thirst. But it's maybe that implies that there's a limitation. That there's terrible famine, but it's limited. And this is a limitation placed by God. This is something that's divinely placed. And then there's a 4th horseman. When you open the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him, and they were given authority over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by wild beasts of the earth. And this is only one of the horses that, only one of the riders that is explicitly named. This one is Death. It's a pale horse. So with pale, think about just the pale color of death. That's, if that's to give you a mental image, that's the image to get here. And with this one given authority to kill a fourth of the population with sword, famine, pestilence, or wild animal. Again, there's a limitation. No, God is always acting to limit. When you see something like this come, there's always limits that are placed. By sword, famine, pestilence, or wild animal. And one thing leads to another, leads to another. Like if you have warfare, then there will be famine. It's the natural result of it. And when you have famine, you are likely to have pestilence, meaning plagues, disease outbreaks as a result of that. It's just a natural progression. And so you can envision warfare and famine that results from that. And then as a result of famine, you have disease, society breaks down, and wild animals roam in the streets. That's the progression. It's not a pretty picture, but I think that's how John's readers would have envisioned it. I think that's how they would have envisioned it. Is probably a good way to look at it.
But God's still showing his mercy.
Yes.
Because he's saving 3/4
Mm-hmm.
of the world,
Yes.
and they still have an opportunity
Yes.
to come to
Mhm.
know him. So
Yes.
he's limiting his judgment and still pouring out mercy.
Yes, exactly right. And I think that as you go through, I'll bring this out later on tonight, as we go through Revelation, it's over and over again that yes, there's judgment on the earth, but it's always tempered. It's always tempered and limited. So this rider brings Hades with him. This rider brings Hades with him, and Hades is simply, it's just a generic Greek word for the place of the dead, the grave. There was a Hebrew equivalent called Sheol that you may come across sometimes in your Old Testaments. Hades and Sheol are equivalents, and it's simply the place of the dead. It's the grave, as opposed to hell, like fiery torment or something. Hades is simply, well, it's death. It's the place of the dead. It's the grave. So that's what is implied here by this fourth rider bringing Hades with him. With these riders, I should have mentioned this before. I've mentioned right at the very beginning of this study that like 3/4 of all the verses in Revelation have some reference to the Old Testament. And with these 4 horsemen, that's the same thing. Zechariah, the prophet Zechariah, describes riders or horsemen. 4 of them. The colors of the horses are different, but you still have 4 horsemen in the prophet Zechariah. So it's not, like I said, it's not a direct quote. The descriptions of the riders are a little different, but certainly read this Oh, Zechariah mentioned horsemen, the prophet Zechariah. So we have warfare as an invasion and possibly deception, or maybe both. How many times have invasions been aided by deception? And then civil war, internal strife, leading to famine, leading to death and violence. It's just a natural progression. And then that leads us to the fifth seal. The fifth and sixth seals are described in much more detail. When you open the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who have been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood and those who dwell in the earth? Then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. The souls of the martyred. The souls of the martyred who've been slain for the word of God, crying out, O sovereign Lord, how long before you judge and avenge us? We get to this. This makes us think back to Revelation 5. Revelation 5:8, John said that there's the incense and the throne room of God is the prayers of the saints. If you look forward to the first few verses of chapter 8, you get the same thing. The prayers of the saints' prayers with incense in the throne room of God in the first few verses of chapter 8. And so here we have the souls of the martyrs crying out to God, how long? Crying out for vengeance. There's nowhere in Revelation that gives us the idea that the saints are spared. It's not there. And we really don't find that in the Bible. The dominant idea in Revelation isn't that we are spared, but the dominant idea is that to be victorious is to be faithful. Is to be faithful. That's the call. That in spite of everything that can be going on around us and like all sorts of terrible, dire stuff, the call is to be faithful. We don't get any hint in Revelation that we are magically spared from it, or being like Scotty beam me up. But if you remember Star Trek, beam us up, Scotty. And that's not the picture. The picture is that saints have been martyred in every age, and in every age saints have been martyred. And so here we have the souls of those martyred saints crying out to God, how long? Like crying out to God for vengeance. And when they're crying out to God for vengeance, it's not so much personal vengeance. God, can you please strike down so-and-so who burned me at the stake, or something. But rather, this is all about God's honor that's being avenged. This is God's righteousness and God's honor that's being avenged here. God's faithful have been oppressed and persecuted throughout history. And this is like, how long, O Lord? How long, O Lord, will you allow your faithful? So that's So this is the cry here. Calling for God's ultimate justice. And God's ultimate justice is, it's a two-edged sword, or a coin with two sides. Part of God's ultimate justice is vindicating the oppressed, the righteous and the oppressed of all the ages. But if you're going to vindicate the righteous and the oppressed, that also means a judgment on the oppressors and the wicked, right? So this is God's ultimate justice here is its vindication of the oppressed and the righteous, and his punishment, judgment on the oppressors and the evil. And justice and judgment is, it cuts both ways. If there's been a crime that's been committed, justice is making its, and justice, part of that is, finding the person who did it and put them on trial, locking them up.
It's like somebody whose, say, son murdered someone else's son, but it's sad for the one that was murdered, but it's also sad for the family
Yes.
of the murderer, because they're losing their son too.
Yes, exactly right, exactly right. So what they're calling for is really what the prophets of old called the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord, that day when God would personally intervene in human history and set everything right, sort of set the world right. And that's what they're calling for. Oh Lord, how long? Come, Lord God, in heaven. How long, O Lord? They're portrayed in white. They're portrayed in white robes, and that makes us think back to the letter to Laodicea, where cured to get fine white wool. You remember that? And we look at, if you look forward, and we'll get to this in a few minutes in chapter 7, there's an innumerable host clothed in white, that having washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. White symbolizes purity. But how is it that one's robes are made white? By the blood of Christ. We are being clothed in white implies purity. And how is one made pure? How is one made righteous? It is by the blood of Christ. It's this remarkable imagery that your robes are made white by dipping in the blood of the Lamb. That leads to the sixth seal, and of these seals, this is probably the longest description, and it's probably the easiest one. It's the easiest and most straightforward of them. When you open the sixth seal, I looked and behold, there's a great earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth, the full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, and the great ones, and the generals, and the rich, and the powerful, and every one, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of the wrath has come, and who can stand? Okay, to me, like I said, to me this is one of the clearer visions to understand. Um, we have a great earthquake, the sun becomes black, the full moon like blood, stars fall from the sky, and that's easy. When you look at the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, each one have a chapter or two where Jesus talks about the end of the age, and the astronomical signs and earthquakes and volcanoes and stuff are all part of that. So when we see these astronomical, this is talking about the end of the age. And this sort of, then again, it's a book full of symbolism. And so like with the Gospels, and you see the same thing appearing here, and actually other places in the Old Testament as well. And stars fall from the sky, the sun turns black, the full moon turns blood red. There's your clue that we're talking about end of the age kind of stuff. The actual specific references, it's Mark 13, Matthew 24, Luke 22, Isaiah 34, Haggai 2, sort of, use the same imagery. Now we know that when the sun turns black, that's a solar eclipse. When the full moon turns blood red, we know that's a lunar eclipse. And in the ancient world, before they understood the relationship between sun, moon, and the earth, the ancients were terrified by a lunar eclipse. When they saw the moon started turning red, like, the gods are mad at us. There's something terrible about to happen. The Greeks figured out what a lunar eclipse was, and we know what a lunar eclipse is. But if you think about the fear that was engendered way back when, the astronomical events portending some cataclysm. That's the idea here. Earthquakes go right along with it. So this is all symbolism that points us toward like end of the age kind of stuff. One of the things I've mentioned all along is that these images that we see are not chronological. Some of what we see is clearly refers to something that happened back then. Some of it refers to the distant future, and some is all over the place. And the kings of the earth, and the great ones, and the generals, and the rich, and the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Malachi 3, like the first couple of verses, has this phrase, and who can stand when he appears? Who can abide the day of his coming, and who can stand when he appears? So that's almost a direct quote here. Who can stand? This is the wrath of the who can hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. I think C.S. Lewis once wrote that this phrase, the wrath of the Lamb, is the most fearful one in all of Scripture. And that's understandable. What is the wrath of the Lamb? Think about all the lambs of history. Think about all the lambs of history. who've been victimized, and that's a lot, are going to be vindicated. The idea of the wrath of the Lamb takes us, it takes us back to the great paradox of Revelation 5. We have the Lion of the tribe of Judah is also the Lamb of God. So the wrath of the Lamb, it's Christ's wrath, but it's also on behalf of all the lambs of history. And the Lamb in chapter 5 still has its wounds. And so the Lamb, the ultimate Lamb, the Lamb of God, always knows, always understands the place of the victims, the place of the suffering lambs of whatever age, always understands that, always identifies with them. And if you're one of the victimized, one of the faithful that's been victimized, you can know that Christ has suffered as you have, and that ultimately Christ will be avenged, and that you will be. So that's the wrath of the Lamb, and this will make your blood run cold. This will make your blood run cold, and really think about all that that phrase means. The suffering Lamb identifies with the sufferings of the faithful throughout history. And all of the great and the near great, and those who think they're great, hide in the mountains and the caves and the rocks. And after this takes us to chapter 7. We have almost like a heavenly timeout. We've got the first 4 seals are opened real fast. First seal is open, there's the first horse, and then the second horseman, the third horseman, and the fourth one. And then the 5th seal, we have the souls of the martyrs crying out, "How long, O Lord?" And then the 6th seal is the cataclysmic events, signs, and astronomically and also geologically with the earthquakes. And then you don't go right into the 7th seal. There's almost like a heavenly timeout. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on the earth or sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun, with the seal of the living God, and he called out with a loud voice to the 4 angels who have been given power to harm earth and sea, saying, "Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees, until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads." And I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. Okay. So, actually, go ahead and read a little bit further. 12,000 from the tribe of Judah were sealed, 12,000 from the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 from the tribe of Gad, then 12,000 from Asher, 12,000 from Naphtali, 12,000 from Manasseh, 12,000 from Simeon, 12,000 from Levi, 12,000 from Issachar, 12,000 from Zebulun, then 12,000 from Joseph, 12,000 from the tribe of Benjamin were sealed. Okay. So let's pick this one apart a little bit, and this is going to get good. Okay. So we have four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the winds. If you remember, you remember our numerology, like 3, 4, 6, 7, 12, etc. The number 4 tends to refer to the natural world, right? The four winds of heaven, the four corners of the earth. So that's, think about that here. He sees these four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the winds. It seems like the term winds here is another way of referring to destruction, coming destruction on the earth. One writer that I was reading just today, suggested that the four winds being held back are the four horsemen that were described in chapter 6. That's a possibility. We can't know, just can't know for certain. They're holding back winds, the destruction, until 144,000 can be sealed by God. Okay, so what does it mean to be sealed? Who are these 144,000? I'll give you two identities for these 144,000 that I do not agree with, and then I'll tell you who I think they are. So there have been all sorts of theories about who these 144,000 are. The Jehovah's Witnesses, in their original doctrine, said that implied that the total number of people to be saved was 144,000. Now, they ran into problems when the total number of Jehovah's Witnesses reached more than 144,000, and so they had to sort of rethink their doctrine. There's a school of thought that this 144,000, that this is a very literal number, and that it refers to Jews who will be saved during a great tribulation, that who will become like a small army of super witnesses. I don't see that. When I read this, I just, like, that to my mind seems totally made up. You're reading an awful lot into it. So let's begin to pick this apart a little bit. So we think about think about 144,000. Let's think about the number, and then we'll get from the number to who they are. Okay. So when you see a number like 144,000, that screams symbolism. There's in a book like Revelation, particularly Revelation, that is clearly not a literal number. That in a book like Revelation, 144,000 is screaming symbolism. 12 tribes, 12 apostles, times 1,000. I mean, I'm not the brightest bulb in the box. I can figure that one out. So let's think about this also. The 12,000 from each of the tribes of Israel. And this is a case where it's easy to gloss over a listing, but if we look at the list, there's some curiosities. Oh, you're shaking your head. So what do you notice that's curious about this listing?
There's no Dan.
There's no tribe of Dan, exactly right. And there's also a curious thing. When you look at listings of the tribes of Israel, typically there wasn't a listing for the tribe of Levi, because the Levites didn't have an inheritance of land. They were the priestly tribe, so there wasn't like a spot on the map that's Levi. So a lot of times the Levites weren't listed. And there's yet another oddity. You don't see, you have a tribe of Joseph being listed. If you go back to the end of Genesis, and Jacob blesses Joseph's two boys, his two little sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And Ephraim and Manasseh each became a tribe. So there's not a tribe of Joseph. Joseph's descendants are split in two. Joseph's descendants become two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. And so when you look through this, you've got a tribe of Manasseh, but not one of Ephraim, but there is one of Joseph. And the tribe of Levi is mentioned, but not the tribe of Dan. This is weird. The tribe of Dan may be not listed because way back when that tribe was associated with idolatry. Now some of the other oddities are just, we can't know why, or at least I don't know why. Like, why would you list Joseph and Manasseh instead of Manasseh and Ephraim? Now certainly you massage the numbers so that you can come up with 12. If you're going to drop Dan, you're going to drop that, and you still have to massage the numbers so you can come up with 12 to make the numbers work right. Which leads us to think that you're not going to be talking about literally 12,000 from each of the named tribes. At the time that John wrote this, very few Jews actually knew what their ethnicity was. Like 700 years earlier, 10 of the tribes had essentially been erased off the face of the earth by the Assyrians. They're the famous, the lost tribes of Israel. The Assyrians had erased them. They scattered them all over the place and brought in new people into the land that intermarried with the few remaining Jews that were left there. And the Samaritans that we read about that the Jews hated so much were the result of just that intermarriage. So those 10 tribes they're gone in terms of human ethnicity. There's not a Jew around. There wasn't a Jew around in 90 AD that could say, "Yet I'm of the tribe of Gad." They're gone. And after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, real soon after that, tribal identity as belonging to Judah or Benjamin was lost. So this isn't talking about like 12,000. I'm 12,000 from Gad. I'm Gad strong. And 12,000 from Issachar, etc. But it's the names get massaged. You can come up with 12. You don't want to list Dan because they're associated with idolatry, and idolatry is not going to fly in Revelation. So we're not thinking about like literal tribal ethnicity. In the grand scheme of things, ethnicity doesn't matter a whole lot to God. So what are we looking at here? 144,000 is a figurative number. It's not literal. 12 times 12 times 1,000. Think about in Revelation 21. Revelation 21, John sees a vision of the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. And in that New Jerusalem, the names of the 12 tribes and the names of the 12 apostles are on the foundations and then the gates of the city. I think that the city had 12 foundations, each one named for one of the apostles, and then the names of the 12 tribes of Israel are on the gates of the New Jerusalem. So, and to me, I think we are looking at the 12 apostles and the 12 tribes times 1,000. This is a picture of the entire company of the redeemed, as I envision it. Now, this is, now I'm not going to argue adamantly that that's right, but I'm pretty certain I'm right on that. And it's hard to be real certain on anything in Revelation. I feel pretty confident of this one.
But it gives you completeness.
Yeah, it is definitely a picture of completeness. 12 tribes, 12 apostles times 1,000. This is the company of the redeemed. What does it mean that they're sealed? What do you think that means?
Protected, saved.
Yeah, they're definitely saved. What if they're protected? What are they protected from?
Tribulation.
Probably not tribulation, because they're in the midst of it.
But they're protected by God.
Yeah.
And I have some notes here that the Orthodox Jews felt that they were protected by their phylacteries.
Yeah.
And they either wore it on their left arm or on their forehead.
Mhm.
And Christians are protected by baptism.
Yeah. So think about a seal in terms of a royal decree. This is a seal like a royal decree, like God's marking them, their mind. It's not protection from earthly harm, because, well, the whole idea of Revelation is terrible stuff is going to happen. Be faithful. Throughout Revelation, I have these souls crying out to God, from the altar, the martyrs. So they're not. This isn't protection from earthly harm, but this is God marking them out. These are mine. These people are mine, and these people. It's the whole company. It's faithful Israel plus the church. It's faithful Israel plus the church. It's the entire company of the redeemed.
Anything will sound right, but I got to say it.
What's that?
Me personally, I think we put too much emphasis on the 144,000.
Yeah.
Because if you read verse 9, then it says there's a number at the footstool that's no man can count.
Yes, that's where I'm going, exactly.
So that's what I've always thought when and you talk about Jehovah's Witnesses, and I haven't seen it, but I talked to Dad. He said that number 9 verse is not in there, but
I've got to look for that.
now I don't know. That's what I heard.
Yeah, that would throw a monkey wrench into their theology.
It's, when I read, since I started trying to, I always thought we put too much emphasis on the 144.
Yeah.
We know what it means.
But in fact, we're going there.
Okay.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we're going there.
Randy wants to teach.
Randy, don't need it.
So the next thing, John, we have after this. Is that chapter 7 begins with an after this, and then we have another after this in the middle of 7. After this, I looked and behold a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the 4 living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, "Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever." So the first, we have 2 different after thises. The first one, this vision of the 144,000 being sealed by God, marked out for God, by God. These are mine. And so that's a vision of earth in the midst of all sorts of turmoil. And when we get to verse 9, after this, and we see this great multitude that no one could number, and they're worshiping the Lamb, that is a vision of the same thing from the far side. So if you looking at the same event, one if you're looking forward towards, and the other one is you're looking back towards it. Does that make sense? So this is, when we get to the second half of chapter 7, this is a vision of the exact same group of people. It's the exact same group of people looking at it from the far side of the turmoil, tribulation, etc. So, a great multitude that no one could number, from every tribe, from every nation, and all tribes and peoples and languages. We have that almost exact same phrasing in chapter 5, maybe it's verse 8. Let's see. No, it's in verse 9. For you are slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe, language, people, and nation. You have virtually the exact same phrasing here in chapter 7, in verse 9. They're standing before the throne, before the Lamb, clothed in white,